Oh, welcome to another episode of the Growth Compass. Shout out to our sponsor, Senders. If you want to do cold email deliverability correctly, there's things in the description for you, but without them, it wouldn't be possible to interview awesome people doing awesome things like Seth. Welcome.
Thank you. How are you?
Man, I'm great. I cannot wait to get into everything you have been, everything you are, everything, everywhere that Loopback Systems is going. This is a really cool project company that you're building, a really cool problem that I think is important. So I'm excited to share your story. But for anyone that is not familiar yet, if you could just give a quick intro of yourself and what you're building.
Yeah, I'm Seth Halam. I'm the general manager at Loopback. We started Loopback several years ago, honestly focused on steam measurement in New York City. So in Manhattan, south of Central Park, there's around 1,500 buildings that have steam service for the last 150 years. And historically, somebody's gone in and read all those steam meters, like to that basement of every hot building in Manhattan by hand for 150 years. And the utility there was looking for a solution for somebody to measure the steam using like an automated process that like logs the data, and then also put some safety systems in place for like steam traps. So when you watch the news and you'll see like a road being blown out in Manhattan with steam like pouring out of it, it's called a water hammer. So that same kind of concept can happen inside of a building. So like you have water in the
It's called a water hammer.
Water hammer, yeah.
Where does that come? Do you know where that name comes from?
Well, I'm guessing the first time that it hit somebody, he called it the water hammer. He got the name. So no, I don't know.
I mean, that just sounds like a superhero, like action move or something. Like
I think the
water
utility
hammer
would say it's not a superhero. Like it's their kryptonite. It's their kryptonite.
Oh, okay. So it's like a villain, like
right.
hit you with
water
this
hammer comes,
yeah,
right.
exactly. Okay.
Public Utilities Commission, coming and finding you.
Right. Yeah, right. So then you have the water hammer coming out of the roads, which is a more popular thing. But you said it can also happen in buildings.
Yeah. So in buildings, you have water hammer is when you have steam in a pipe, and then water condensates out, and then steam rushes through, and then that like slug of water gets momentum, and as it starts rushing through the pipe, it hits with all the weight of the water in the pipe, which was designed for steam, which is obviously less dense. So then it can cause a blowout of pipes. So we built working with the utility, we built some safety systems so they can monitor all these steam traps inside the buildings, and it's called a cold trap. So then it's like, okay, there's water there, there's not steam flowing through the trap. So then they have like a central dispatch center, and they can send somebody there, and then they're building, they're taking this data now and building like some really cool things of trying to predict when failures happen, and how many times has a failure happened, and should we send somebody there? Is there other pieces of data? So honestly, it's a really cool project that really got us off the ground as like kind of a conventional startup, I'd say. Like we had real kind of work, and we weren't necessarily going out looking for VC money or investors, because we had just things that needed done, right? So like it's That's great awesome. Work. It's the utility there is amazing to work with. It was just a grind out of work though, right? Of like write this, do this, get this to work. But I'm actually headed there next week for some, we're kind of always like upgrading, adding functionality and changing functionality. And so that was like the core of our business. And then one of my business partners got a call from someone who's like, hey, we have this problem where we have all these solar sites, which are called distributed energy resource sites, that are trying to connect into our grid, and we need to get information from them. And like right now, the way we handle that is like this kind of antiquated way. So if you or I started our career at a utility, there might be 5 generation projects that come on over 30 years, let's say, because it was like a natural gas power plant, a nuclear power plant, some sort of, cogen power plant, right? I mean, it wasn't like Blake and Seth starting up a solar farm. Well, now it's Blake and Seth starting a solar farm, and it might only be 3 megawatts, but the sum of those pieces are impactful to the utility grid. So we came out with a product called PowerWatch, which is basically the utility needs to be able to communicate and grab data from the site, SCADA data, meter data from the site, but they don't want to, nor do they have the resource, nor can they get the funding through a tariff case to work for, to fund putting the equipment that's at that site and then maintaining the service at that site, right? Because instead of it being like 5 um, projects your whole career, in Maine from, let's call it middle of 2021 until now, there's been 150 projects, right? So, but the utility still has the same amount of people in like their communications groups and their security groups, that type of stuff, right? They're not able to like staff way up, because the staff way up, you have to go to the Public Utilities Commission, you have to get increased rates, and then there's questions asked of like, oh, are we increasing rates because these solar developers are coming into the area? Meanwhile, the citizens of Maine have to pay more money, right, for power because we need more people, even though the developers are the people who are making money. So our model is we go to the utility, we say, hey, what is your standard? We develop a literal set of standards, like an engineered document that of the hardware that's going to be put at the site. And then we overlay like some cybersecurity encryption to meet their cybersecurity encryption piece. But what we quickly found is like designing hardware isn't something that can be completed. It's an objective, but there's a lot of very subjective things because in this case, the utility has like 20 to 30 different steps that have to be completed by somewhat disparate groups inside of the utility, right? So, you and I are in the telecommunications group. Then there's a metering group that needs to know that they should reach out and try to grab data from the meter of how much power is produced from that site. After the box is installed at the site, the VPN connections are up from the cybersecurity group, then we have to tell them, yes, we have to tell them there's somebody in metering who has to go out and physically install the meter, plug it in, and then Loopback Systems, verifies that the meter is connected. And then we tell this person at the utility, okay, now can you please try to grab data from the meter?
So and so that application that you just spoke to at the end. So from my understanding, you went from servicing specifically, capturing steam, creating a way for facilities managers to manage those like the building water hammer potential and other things like that. You designed a product for that, and there was good work. And then you found this problem with the utility companies that you're speaking to, and then there's this software layer that you. Well, is that a correct understanding of what we just
Yeah,
walked
so
through?
I would say like Steam is how we started. That's like still the core of our, part of our core business for sure.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
then we
okay.
then we said, okay, like we're gonna like then the DER solar stuff took off, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act.
Sure.
There's
Yeah.
a huge amount of funding for that. So all these people started rushing to specific areas in the country. So you had the Inflation Reduction Act, and then carrying on with our example, in Maine, there's also funding which subsidized solar development to simplify. So there's like
On
all
a
these
state level.
on a state level. Yeah. So
Okay.
you had like funding for tax credits, and then you also had like there was projects where you could essentially get residential rates for solar farms. So you would get like credit back on your bill, and I don't know the exact specifics, but then you can like sell those credits or like cash those credits out. So
Okay.
instead of like getting like a transmission rate of let's say 7 cents per kilowatt hour, some people were getting 20 cents per kilowatt hour for solar farms. So people rush there, like solar developers from all around the country who we work with now because of PowerWatch, and started
Sure.
putting in, there's obviously tons of open land in Maine too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there's some community impact too of like, you see signs when you go there of like farms are being turned into solar farms. What does
Sure.
this look like in 30 years? And I have a background in oil and gas, so it's kind of the same thing with like oil and gas development, right? I mean, you bring a well on, you have prolific production, and then what does that site look like in 30 years when the well isn't producing as much? Now solar, decreases a couple percentage a year, so it's not like a well, a shale well can decrease 50 to 70% in its first year, like production wise.
Sure.
Solar will obviously keep going, but solar panels in 30 years are going to need to be replaced, right, or whatever
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
lifespan is. So yeah, so then a customer came to us with a problem. We said, hey, we have all the tools to solve this problem: hardware, communications, kind of like networking, nerdy networking stuff wise.
Yeah.
But then on the business front, I think the reason PowerWatch is successful is on the business front, we built a workflow management tool to be able to connect all these different groups. You have the developer, you have group A, B, C, D inside the utility, and you have us. So we can track the process all the way along. And instead of somebody like Blake, if you're the meter guy, instead of you having to keep track of when you need to do something on this project, we actually kick you a notification that says, "Hey, Blake, Woods Run Solar is ready to come online. Can you please make sure that you can communicate with the meter?" Right.
Wow.
So, before there had to be somebody inside who like kept track of all those steps.
Yeah. So as far okay, so if there are this many stakeholders ultimately in once you guys deploy a solution, what does it look like as far as capturing of new customers? Do you have to get like who is it that you need to have sign off from? Is it one stakeholder that then tells the other stakeholders like, hey, this is how this meter is being ran now, sign in, integrate into the software, or is it that, there are a couple of people that could get in the way of an installation?
Yeah. So I say it this way: the good news is that we have two customers. The bad news is you can only have one best customer, right? So,
Okay.
from a commercial side, let's say the utility has to make the investment to connect to our infrastructure. So basically, they say, "Hey, we have an influx of renewable energy projects coming out in our area." They connect to our infrastructure. The utility pays a yearly fee to connect to our infrastructure, but then we offload all those internal processes from them, and we handle that. But then, if you and I are developing a solar farm, let's say Manny Ray's solar farm, right?
Okay.
Then you and I would go to Loopback Systems and say, "Hey, I am in this utility's territory. I want to buy their standard control cabinet because I need to connect to their grid." And then Loopback would sell that directly to the developer. And then the developer pays us a yearly
On
subscription.
behalf of the utility?
Well, no, I mean, we would sell the utility standard.
Okay.
So in other
But
words,
it's
it'd be like
yours.
when a college professor specs a textbook, right? Like you have
Okay.
to go buy that textbook. Could have been written by somebody else,
Yeah,
but if
yeah.
you want to do the problems, you have to go buy that textbook.
Okay,
Same
yeah.
kind of concept for us is like, yes, we manufacture, we build that, we have them in stock here in our office, like
Oh,
here,
wow, okay.
yeah, in Pittsburgh, and then we ship them out to Blake and Seth's solar farm, and you mount that panel up, and then it's the backbone cellular based. So we have connections to like all of the major carriers: Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, US Cellular,
Okay.
using private infrastructure. And then once that site's online, then we'll reach out to the first step of the utility and say, "Hey, the Many Ray Solar Farm is ready to have the encrypted tunnels turned up," and we'll give that task to someone at the utility so they can focus on. Got to remember, they had a day job. They still have a day job. And now all these little solar farms are coming in between,
Right.
right?
Sure. Yeah.
So if there's a problem on that site, under the conventional model, the utility up until now would have had to buy that panel, which costs $7,000 to $15,000, let's say, right? They would have had to buy that panel. They would have had to send somebody there and install it. They would have had somebody send somebody there to start it up. So we handled all three of those pieces, right? They didn't have to spend the capital to buy that panel. They didn't have to send someone there to install it because either the customer installed it, the developer installed it, like the solar site, or
Sure.
we installed it. And then they don't have to pay the ongoing maintenance cost to connect it to a cellular network because the developer pays that cost.
So what? So why? So you're lowering the. If we could just simplify, if I understand correctly, you're lowering the barrier to developing new solar farms.
Lowering the barrier to developing new solar farms. And also, when we first go talk to utility, I think they have a little trepidation in that the developers might push back on like, "Oh, you have like kind of like a single source for like where to buy hardware from." But the developers are happy because we have a clear pathway for them to get connected to the grid, right?
Right.
So you got
Right.
to remember, this is for communication stuff only. Like the wires, that you bring to the site, like that's a huge undertaking. You have to bring it to a substation. So this is just a little tiny piece of, let's say a solar farm costs $3 to $5 million to bring online, right? So this is a $15,000 item for the developer. So they're like, "Oh, we can reach out to one company and we don't have to try to figure out all these steps inside the utility
Right.
ourselves,
Right.
and they'll like make sure that it's meets the utility standard." Then we actually have like an interface for the developer and the utility to look at, so they can know like the status of like order placed, order shipped. I mean, it's like we're kind of like let's say Amazoning, but that's I think cheapening the product too much. But Amazoning
Uh-huh.
our Amazoning our the process for something that was kind of archaic in a lot of cases.
Wow. So why, if you have this perspective, I'd be interested. If not, that's okay. But I'm curious why, if this was such, this seems like such a, I think as a lot of good companies, after you very clearly describe the problem and the solution, people are like, well, duh, like that makes so much sense, which is great. And, but it's never that easy when the solution hasn't been, created, things like that. So before loopback systems and all of these, and your PowerWatch products. So why is it that nobody has attempted, or have people attempted in different ways to address these specific problems, or are you the first one to do it of your knowledge?
No, so I'll answer your question, but in the longest way possible.
Okay,
So,
let's do it.
yeah, let's. So of course, there's some companies that have similar I would say competition to us, and then B, I think like coming from the corporate world, you have to ask yourself like, if I have a good idea, why hasn't anybody else had this good idea
Sure.
before, right? Because I'm not that smart. You know what I mean? So like, like why hasn't somebody else done that? And I think
Yep.
that's a very fair question, and keeps you grounded to ask that question. And I think the answer to that is that a it's an investment in infrastructure. B, you have to. Um, so the hardest part about this is incentivizing the utilities to want to change. Now, the people we work with at the utilities are amazing. My point is that they have essentially monopolies, utilities, right? Because like they have an operating area. So like when they make money, there's a sentiment of they can go to when they make money, they make money. If they don't make money, some folks would say they can go to the Public Utilities Commission and get more money. Now that's not
Sure.
necessarily the case,
Uh,
but you have to incentivize the utility to want to make this type of forward progress. And then B, I think, or I don't know what letter we're at. We'll call it C.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So I think then too, the life cycle, honestly, the sales cycle is just long. It's 2 years, right? So because it has to be secure. You have to get the utility connected to our network. You have to come out with these drawings. You want to do some pilot sites, right, to prove to everybody at the utility that it's going to work. There's a lot of different stakeholders, right? That from the transmission guys to the energy control center guys. So yeah, so to go full circle on your question, there are competitors out there that do something similar. I think we're the only one who kind of doesn't middleman. So in other words, there's people who aggregate data, and then B, I think that we had the opportunity to implement it at a utility, and that was hugely successful for us as we continue to implement in other utilities. So like we know when we go to a utility, I think what you see is a lot of like you call it utility tech folks. They have a concept, but they haven't done it.
Mhm.
Right. So we can go when we get pitches, we can go and say, yeah, we've done this. Here's actual life cycle from actual customers from when they first contacted us. 6 weeks later, they have all their communications equipment installed and they're up and working.
So 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 I think this is just, I mean, it's felt like 30 seconds. It's already been, almost 20 minutes, but I feel like this is just, it's so interesting, I think, how you've developed your company and the problem that you're solving. So I really loved walking through that. I did want to give you some space, just to step back first to talk about how you got here and why. So you mentioned briefly that you were in oil and gas beforehand. So is this the first company you started? Like, why entrepreneurship? Usually I ask those in succession, but you can kind of tackle it in one. Your corporate experience, how you digest it, how was it for you, and then how did you transition into entrepreneurship? With Loopback.
Yeah. So I have a petroleum engineering degree. Left school and went up to Northeast Pennsylvania to work for Capital Oil and Gas, which was an oil and gas company, still exists under a company called Coterra. Worked in the field for 6 years, and when I got there, I was supposed to be a production engineer. I was for about 2 weeks, and um, found some issues with our just I wouldn't even say issues, support needed on telemetry, instrumentation, that type of stuff. So I jumped into that right away, and then just kind of that group fell under me. I ended up having our technical services group, which is like construction, fall under me. So I'm really interested in like how things work, why they work. Like I'm actually going to New York City next week. I think I mentioned for some steam stuff, And I could have someone else go there, but I just really want to be like hands on, right? So I kind of always thought, oh, I'll just always work in corporate America. That's like kind of the culture that I'd say I grew up in. You go to petroleum engineering, there aren't a lot of like startups petroleum engineering wise. It's
Yeah,
like,
sure.
I mean, it takes a little bit of money to do
Yeah.
oil and natural gas drilling, right?
Yeah.
Um, so transferred down to Pittsburgh, and then this opportunity came along for um, steam measurement, and actually me and one of the folks that I worked with at Coterra decided to make the jump and really focus on the steam measurement stuff.
I mean, why? Like you said, you could have. I mean, maybe maybe not with such a niche application, but if this is a problem that interested you, whatever the nature of the problem interested you. I mean, I don't know if it's specifically steam management, water hammer, things like that, but just something like a technical challenge, something else you wanted to learn more. Like you could have found a job at a different corporation, but entrepreneurship is like one of the most difficult things you could choose to do. So why was it that you were like, in order to pursue this, let's start a company versus like, oh, let me just like find a company that's doing it and then transfer over?
Yeah, so I think that's a really fair question. I'd say my wife asks me that all the time. No, so the answer is Coterra was a great place to work. Like I still hang out with, I'm still friends with tons of people who work there. It's a great company. They take care of you if you take care of them. I think it's like I kind of have this mindset of like, to live is to suffer, to find meaning in suffering is to live. So
Hmm.
it's like I just want I didn't the entrepreneur thing was a foreign concept to me. Like I grew up in the city of Akron, Ohio. Like you worked for a corporation, so even now sometimes I'm still stuck on like, am I an entrepreneur, right? Like, am I actually like entrepreneurial? And I mean, I think the answer is yes now,
Yeah.
but it's just you grind every day, and I have a desire, I think, to grind every day. You know, like you know, one of my favorite tweets is over the past 5 years was like, I pay my landlord an extra rent payment every year just so I can grind harder, you know, and like
That's funny.
so I just it's now are there days where I'm like, hey, I wish I knew where I wish I knew a paycheck was coming next week no matter what, right?
Yeah,
And as
yeah,
we've grown, we've added folks to Loopback. We had a
yeah.
new guy start last week. He's got a
Congrats.
child on the way. So it's like now you have the stress on top of like just me being out here for the grind of like you know our principal engineer has a teenager. Alex has a child on the way. We have another guy. Who's like so it's that builds up, right? That kind of grinding thing, and then you find meaning in it. Especially with everything that's going on in the world. Just keep your head down and focus on what you can focus on and change what you can change. And the there's been some profound changes in renewables now. I'm guessing you've talked about with other folks on your podcast. I've watched some of the episodes, and so but still, it's a grind, and we'll grind through it, and progress is progress. So,
Well, are you somebody that finds and there's no like expected answer from this. I think a lot of people are want to find like
can you message me the
divine.
expected answer?
Yeah, no, let me just do it as I'm speaking. I'll
All right.
type right. But
Evan,
no,
what should I answer?
no, yeah. Well, um, what I mean is that I think typically when I ask a question like that, there's people that like find divine purpose in like doing something extremely good for the planet and something like that. But there are a lot of people that do things like for the sake of the challenge, for the sake of the grind, like you're saying. So you being, I mean, you're from my perspective, you're doing something very important as far as like pushing forward towards a future that considers climate change, that considers like environmental sustainability, and ultimately is good for the planet and humans and all of that stuff. Coming from oil and gas specifically, you could have like this experience where it was like, oh, I just like I got burnt out and like I got discouraged in like the oil industry and stuff. But it sounds like you have positive experience there, which I think is good. So like, what's your take on why you're doing what you're doing relative to like planet, good for the planet, like especially coming from oil and gas?
Yeah, so we still do quite a bit of work. Loopback actually Systems does quite a bit of work in oil and gas still. And I think the thing I liked about oil and gas is the same thing I like about renewables, is that the same reason I liked working in the field and like going to New York City is it's tangible. So it's something that like a product that you can turn off. So like derivatives at banks. Like you can't turn that off, like because it doesn't exist, right? It's,
Yeah.
if you ask me, it's not real,
Yeah.
right? So oil and gas you can turn off if you don't like that as a product. Solar you can turn off if you don't like that as a product. PowerWatch you can turn off if you don't like that as a product. So it's something tangible that we're delivering. Like at the end of the day, we can say like these are our panels. At the end of I left Cabot and I still keep in touch with people from there.
Yeah.
Get photos of like here's what the things we did, right? Here's the safety system that we put in place. Here's how it worked to keep the site safe in this event. I kind of live by like any job worth doing is worth doing right. So, whether or not it's how impactful it is to like climate change, there's just like kind of the right way to go about doing things and the wrong way to go about doing things. And there's a lot of nuanced area in there also. Working with oil and gas folks to minimize their emissions, right? I mean, they're going to produce oil and gas no matter what, but we might as well figure out how we can keep their emissions down. With PowerWatch, if we can get solar sites online faster, then we can outrun the kind of tampering down politically of solar. I have this old house in Pittsburgh here, and there's some built-in box gutters they're called, and they're all around the house, and everybody's like, why don't you just rip them off and put in conventional aluminum gutters? And I have scaffold, looks like Notre Dame in my house. It's all around.
Uh-huh.
And it's like because it's something tangible that you can look back on and be like, hey, I worked on that, right? And like my here it's like the team that we have here, we can look at the stuff we did and be like, hey, we did that, right? So I don't know that I have the exact answer of like from a moral perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like it's something tangible that we feel like is the right thing to do and contributes positively to kind of our enrichment, not from a dollar perspective, but our enrichment as a society, right?
Yeah.
So we have an intern. We had an intern here. Her last day was last Friday, right? It's a small shop. It's not necessarily easy to make sure that we have that mentorship program, but like youth are the future, right? I know it sounds like 105, but it's
true though.
I'm 105.
No, oh well. I mean, I don't know that. I mean, we haven't gotten that far, but I mean, it is true. It's a cliche because it is true. Like youth future. So, but I appreciate that answer. I think it's really cool. I mean, the reason I asked is because I think you have a cool perspective on that. And so, my last two questions, two of my favorite questions to ask is the first one is and people ask it both ways, and you can take it however you want. But it is, what is the biggest hurdle that you're facing at the moment, and how is it an opportunity? Or what would you do if you had more time or money available to you relative to Loopback?
Right. So I think the hardest part about Loopback is knowing when to say no, because we have these obligations here on making sure that we keep our people employed, right? I know we're doing fine, but it's like I feel like as like us, like I said, from our background, we're in this like weird zone between like startup and small business. So I'm gonna put my small business hat on. Is like just knowing when to say no, right? Because something could come across your desk and you're like, we should jump into that, but that means that you're like missing another opportunity, right? Like so I think that's like, believe it or not, like it's not like we're please anybody watching this, it's not like we're turning down all work that comes our way, right? Yeah. But it's hard to balance, right? Because one week you're down, you're like, man, maybe we should turn this into a company that digs ditches. You know what I mean? Because we'll do anything. And then the next week, you get an opportunity to work with somebody great. And then I think your second question was, give it to me again.
Well, it was either way you want to do it. Either what's the biggest hurdle, how is it an opportunity, which I think you answered it in the same one, and also what would you do with more time and money?
Yeah, so I think time is the only thing that's really quantifiable in life, and I think that if we said more time, we would go back to when we kicked this project off and really have invested in marketing assets and like engineering assets. Like we had our product is strong. Like Chris Remus, who worked with us to build it, he's a principal engineer. He and I, we have a good foundation, but you really got to get out of that engineering dichotomy and get into like, this is our product, this is our elevator pitch, this is how it'll help you. Like marketing matters, and I think a lot of engineers really get caught up. And when I say marketing, I don't mean like, tangentially. I think I mean like, being able to say what your product is if you only have 30 seconds to talk to somebody is really important. Like you don't need to prove to them how smart you are or how cool your project is. You need to prove to them that you have something that will help them. And I think a lot of like engineer types like myself can get caught up in not valuing that, just trying to perfect the product, like some
Yeah.
back end niche thing, as opposed to just like we got to get this product out there. We need to make sure that it's compliant and everything, but we need to get some reactions before we build in a vacuum.
Yeah, Seth, preach, preach. I love that. That is something that's so dear to my heart. Is exactly what you're saying. And I think there's a lot of people that are doing impactful work in the climate tech space. They're very smart, very technical, and just don't think about how does this idea come into reality? How does this go into society? I mean, that's so cool. So thank you for saying that. And lastly, out of all the cool things that you're doing, out of all the things that you're juggling, especially the gutters, what inspires you to keep going?
Let's see what inspires me to keep going. I just the ex- I guess the people that you get to talk to and the people that you get to work with and the things you get to see. You know, we're you know, you go to New York City, you are walking around New York City with the steam folks, and you see crazy, not crazy things. You just get to see a lot of things. There's tunnels underneath New York City that have steam running through them that are 20 blocks long, right? That you just wouldn't know about. So I don't know. I guess like inquisitive minds want to know. 2 weeks ago I was on a large battery energy storage system in Maine. It's essentially just a bunch of batteries on 10 or 20 acres. They take power off at low price and put it back on at high price, and then it supplements the grid in that area. So inquisitive mind wants to know it. It's I don't know the experience of life. I don't know. That's what keeps. Again, I mean, I think it's the same kind of corporate thing. Is leaving the corporate world is you know you get more experiences in this
Yeah.
world. It's more
Yeah.
nuanced.
Absolutely. I think that's a great answer. I appreciate that. So if anyone else was because this was a awesome conversation. I have so many more questions for you. But if there's anyone else that was inspired to either follow along or get in touch, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, just go to our website loopback.systems, loopbacksystems.com, and then yeah, email me Seth at loopback.systems. Pretty straightforward.
Do it.
Odd. Yeah.
Reach out. Follow along. They're just some awesome
I don't
stuff.
have like an Instagram handle or anything like that, but I
No,
got
it's
an email. I got an email handle. So
yeah, you got an email handle and your website's nice. It's pretty cool. It's got the product and everything. So I think people should check it out. Seth, thank you so much for hopping on today. I'm excited to stay in touch. See where you go.
all right, thank you. Have a good one.
Got it.
All right, see you.